it's been. It sounds like a pre-recorded Christmas special, doesn't it? What a strange year it's been, particularly in the realm of politics, where Rishi Sunak briefly looked as if he would mark a departure from the corruption and incompetence that had typified previous administrations, and then appointed Suella Braverman back to her role in the Home Office and confirmed the worst fears that he proved to be at least as bad, if not worse, as his predecessors. And of course, I don't know what you do. Is it what do you think defines Rishi Sunak? Is it 5 pledges or 7 bins? 7 bins or 5 pledges? And this is what he bet the house on. The 5 pledges that he would achieve in 2023. He said he would halve inflation, which I think he probably has, hasn't he? Using the measures that they chose to use. But that was the one that everybody said was going to happen anyway. That was the pledge to halve inflation that had rocketed largely as a consequence of energy prices rocketing as a consequence of the war in Ukraine. He said he would grow the economy. As you've seen, the latest reports today have got GDP dipping in the third quarter. So we won't know for sure whether he has grown the economy until the 13th of February 2024. But it is hard to imagine a worse end to the year for him than today, which is sort of the end of the working year. And he will be reading in his, I don't know where he is, in Richmond or in Downing Street. He will be hearing all over the news and reading everywhere that he is currently presiding over a country that went into negative growth in the last quarter. Things were even worse than originally feared. He said debt would fall. It's not. It is currently rising. It's getting close to 100% of the size of the economy. I've got the figures from October. I mean, there may be more recently published figures. He said he would cut NHS waiting lists. How does that feel? How do you think that's going where you are? The grimmest story I think I've read this month, and do you know, it was so grim, and I probably shouldn't do this. It was so grim that I think I didn't even tell you about it on air. The producer's eye was caught by this. Eleanor was quite upset by it. The idea that one of the reasons why some waiting lists might be coming down is because the people on them were now dying. They'd been on the waiting list so long. So I don't know that one has gone well, NHS waiting lists. And then finally, stopping the small boats, which I need to accompany that reminder of that so-called pledge by telling you that today the claims about the situation in Rwanda are being rejected by dissidents from Rwanda. Rwandan dissidents living in the UK who have received police warnings over assassination attempts from the African country's agents have spoken of their shock and dismay at Rishi Sunak's insistence that it is a safe country. Political opponents of the Kagame regime living in London have described Sunak's claim that Rwanda is safe as unbelievable. So we put stopping the boats down there as well. So what have we got? Let's just recap on this before we get stuck in. We have got debt falling, economy growing, and inflation halving. Now, this doesn't automatically lend itself to a light-hearted phone-in, so we won't spend all of our time in the shallow end. I want to step away for a moment from the political coverage of these pledges and look at the lived reality of them. So debt falling doesn't really affect us that much. Inflation halving does, in terms of our day-to-day experience. The cost of food is still going up. Poor old 30p Lee rather soiled himself on Twitter the other day by claiming that people were better off as a consequence of inflation coming down. And, of course, inflation means that your prices are still going up. So every day's a school day, I suppose, if you're 30p Lee. Hospital waiting lists, I would argue, are the most important and probably the biggest failure. And then stopping the boats, just such a mad policy. A pledge to undo damage done by a situation created entirely by his own party. So I've got in the back of my mind two questions, because I don't want to treat it as a completely funny exercise. So I want to know, what was the stupidest of those pledges? Or I'm going to say the most stupid, because I don't think stupidest is a word. Keith, is stupidest a word? Do we know? It is a word. Apparently, do you think stupidest is a word? Do you think stupidest is a word? Everyone thinks stupidest is a word. So we stick with stupidest, do we? Stupidest? So which of the 5 pledges was the stupidest? 0345 6060 973. Was it the pledge to halve inflation? Was it the pledge to grow the economy? Was it the pledge that debt would fall? The pledge to cut waiting lists? Or the pledge to stop the boats? So have a think about that. But on a more serious note, what's the most important of those pledges to you? To you personally, and then I want you to tell me why. So you don't have to answer both questions. You can answer the first question or the second question or both questions, but you can't answer no questions. What you cannot do, even on this parameter redefining phone-in show, you cannot ring in and answer none of the questions that have been asked. Although, seeing as it's the last hour of our time together this year, I'm not going to punish you if you try. 9 minutes after 12 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And the questions that I want you to answer are these. Which of Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges was, now that we've reached the end of the year in which he promised they would all be achieved, which is the stupidest? Is it the pledge to halve inflation, the pledge to grow the economy, the pledge to cut national debt, the pledge to cut waiting lists, or indeed the pledge to stop the boats? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Now, I'm gonna go first, and I'm going to be a bit controversial, actually. And I am going to say that the stupidest was actually the pledge to halve inflation, even though it's the only one, as far as I can tell, that he has achieved. And the reason for that is that it proved that his opinion of the British public was similar to the Daily Mail editor's opinion of Daily Mail readers. He really did think you were stupid enough to fall for the idea that governments bear no responsibility whatsoever for inflation going up, which I think he actually claimed on the record, nothing to do with us, while they can claim full responsibility when inflation actually goes down. So inflation, largely seen as being independent of government policy, went through the roof when Russia invaded Ukraine, largely because of the increased costs of both food that was making its way from that part of the world, and most crucially, energy. And as those situations have eased, so inflation has come down. So I think the stupidest one, politically speaking, was actually the inflation pledge, because not only did it demonstrate disingenuousness, but it also showed, do you know what it constituted? A bet on the stupidity of the British voting public. So it was both disingenuous and actually dishonest, because it wouldn't be his achievement even if it happened. But the fact that he thought you would believe that it would be his achievement even if it happened would speak to a very low opinion of his voters' intelligence, possibly justified. So that, for me, I'm going to keep proper charts. We're going to do this properly if you want to join in. So I'm going to do points on one side. I'm just describing to you now the piece of paper that I've got in front of me. So I'll write the 5 pledges on it, and then I'll put stupid on the left, important on the right, and you can vote for one or both or neither. The inflation halving, the economy growing, the debt falling, the waiting lists falling, and stop the boats. So what was the stupidest and what was the most important? So we've got one vote for inflation being the stupidest. And on the most important, I think I'm going to go with waiting lists on that. But I need to know from you, and this will be where the conversation moves very much into more serious territory. I want to know from you why the failure to cut the waiting list is so terrible for you and or your family. So the stupidest of the 5 pledges and the most important of the 5 pledges. So in a way, we're looking for the one he shouldn't have made and the one he really should have kept. That may even be a better way of looking at it. The one he shouldn't have made and the one he really should have kept. halving inflation, growing the economy, bringing down debt, cutting the waiting lists, and or stopping the boats. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Let's kick off with Balama, who's in Lambeth. Balama, what's it going to be?
Hi, James. I thought the most important is obviously the waiting list. I attended a conference earlier this year at the... I'm trying to remember the name of the author who who wrote several books, and my children love his books. Yeah. So we went to his village, and at the conference, we were in a room of 7 in a breakout group, and 5 of us spoke about the NHS waiting list, and of the 5, 4 were on the waiting list.
Good grief.
And obviously, we know that the economy cannot grow when you have over 7 million people on the waiting list who cannot work.
It's amazing how rarely those dots are joined, isn't it? Because they've started talking about encouraging people who are unfit to work back to work, even while they remain unfit to work, and not talking about making sure that people who are currently too unfit to work because of illness or medical need get their medical needs addressed, and then they'll be able to go back to work again.
Yeah, absolutely. Telling people to go back to work when you know they cannot, including, for example, when they said they were going to encourage the disabled or those who have special needs to go back to work, but without putting anything in place to encourage employers to provide for them. We obviously know that it will cost employers more, but what he did, James, when the waiting list weren't going down was that number one, he started blaming the NHS, saying it was because of the strikes, when we know that the waiting list was growing before the strikes, and then he said it was COVID. We know that it was growing before COVID. But remember,
No, I was just thinking it could be the stupidest pledge, as well as the most important, for the reasons that you've just reminded us of.
Yeah, but James, it is not the stupidest from Rishi Sunak's perspective, because when he saw that it was not going down, he walked back from the pledge. He didn't speak about it at the conference, if you remember. But the stupidest is Rwanda, because he kept taking steps that made it even more ridiculous after he made the initial pledge. He said he was going to stop the boats. They entered into the Rwanda agreement. His Home Office secretary was there saying that's the dream of her life. And then it didn't happen. They changed the law 3 times. They proposed bills 3 times. It did not work. He legislated reality to say that Rwanda was safe. I thought, James, he missed an opportunity there. If you can legislate reality and say Rwanda was safe, why don't you just go straight to the plate and legislate that the small boats have stopped, even though they haven't stopped?
Don't stop there, Balama. You could pass legislation to say that the waiting list has been cut, debt has fallen, the economy has grown, and inflation has disappeared entirely.
Yeah, and I am doing everything, obviously, all of this because of the elections. The 2024 elections have held, and I have won. And so you can stay another 5 years.
I mean, we shouldn't joke. I mean, if they can pass legislation to make an unsafe country safe, maybe they can pass legislation to say that a waiting list isn't really a waiting list. Thank you, Balama. That's 2 excellent votes. One for waiting lists being the most important. That's now up to 2. I suspect that's going to be a runaway leader. But Stop the Boats getting a vote for being the stupidest. It's your turn to vote next on 0345 6060 973. Great stuff. It's 12:17.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 18 minutes after 12. There were 5 pledges, all of which were supposed to be delivered by the end of this year. The year is essentially up. Which has turned out to be the stupidest and which has turned out to be the most important. Halve inflation, grow the economy, cut debt, cut waiting lists, and stop the boats. And the competition is hopping up. Stan's in Overton. Are you looking out the window?
No, I'm not. No, why are you there?
No, I just thought that would be the Overton window, wouldn't it? What have you got for me, Stan?
My vote has got to be the stupidest is to cut the waiting list. While we all knew there was an ongoing wage situation with the NHS staff,
yes.
And they was already on strikes. They already had planned strikes. They was already having to cancel operations.
Junior doctors were, but I don't know if we knew that the nurses were actually going to join them. So it got worse, not better.
Well, yes. I mean, it's you know, to come out with that when you knew you had no intention of putting and to do anything about the wages, and you know, obviously, and then the most important, if you're going to halve inflation, you can't do both. You haven't served one purpose.
I like the way you're just laughing as you talk through this. I mean, there's not even any attempt at taking them seriously. It's just a sort of curious, like an amalgam of idiocy, which he thought somehow.
I can't take him serious, to be honest.
But did you at the time, though? Because, I mean, for a few minutes he seemed to be quite sensible, didn't he?
Well, I mean, let's put it down. I mean, he's somebody that would love to halve inflation, I'm sure, because it serves his purpose. He's one of the people luckily enough, and fair play to him, he's worked hard, to not have to actually worry so much about that.
And the most important?
Well, as I say, it's got to be the half inflation.
Sorry,
but,
yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not. No, yeah, all right. I don't know if I've explained but it's not it can't be. So it's the most important thing that needed to happen.
Yeah.
But it wasn't something that he could control.
Well, I mean, you can't control everything, but I mean, to pledge it, then you have to have some sort of, confidence in what you're saying. Otherwise, it's just a load of lies. Which obviously
you're right. Yeah, well, is it lies or is it less? Is it more? And what did he actually say at the time? The 5 pledges would deliver peace of mind, build a better future for the next generation. He told us he was going to work night and day to fulfil the promises. He also said he would detain those making illegal migrant crossings and insinuated tougher measures. So absolutely no doubt whatsoever that he was intending or promising that these things would have arrived in the United Kingdom by now. And I think it's fair to say that they haven't. I knew this wouldn't. My numbers are all over the place. You should see the state. Look at that. It looks like a drunk spider has fallen into an inkwell and then crawled across a piece of paper. As it stands, I've got waiting lists, 2 stupids and 2 importants for the waiting lists. 1 stupid for stop the boats, 1 stupid for inflation, and 1 important for halving inflation, which means that I've counted wrong already. We've only had 3 votes, and I've got 7. So I don't think anyone else. No, only Stan said that the waiting lists were important. I must have just doodled that while I was listening to him. Of course, there was another set of pledges that was issued at around the same time that Rishi Sunak issued his. Perhaps we could also double check to see whether any of those pledges have been realised. That is my pledge. My pledges to you today are these. The sun will come up tomorrow. There'll be a full moon in the next month, possibly 2. An English team will win the FA Cup. It will rain before the next general election. And tomorrow, the Daily Mail will run an article, at least one article, again, I may over-deliver on this, that is critical of Harry and Meghan. And I want you to judge me according to these pledges. I want you to look at these pledges and tell me, let me get the words exactly right, they are your priorities, those are the people's priorities, and we will either have achieved them or not. It's 11 o'clock. So that line there, straight from Rishi Sunak, we will either have achieved them or not. What do you cling to as a Tory if you want to pretend that things haven't actually gone disastrously for him, when he said we will either achieve them or not, and you've got 4 nots and not really on the inflation. It may have been halved, but it's fair to say that it wasn't much to do with him. Manchester City, wasn't it, the FA Cup, I think? So I got that one right. So there you go, 1 for 1. Did the sun come up the next day? So I made that pledge on the 5th of January 2023. The next day was actually Epiphany. I wonder whether you had an epiphany when the sun came up and thought, I wonder whether James's pledges are going to turn out to be rather more reliable than Rishi Sunak's. There was a negative story about Prince Harry and Meghan in the Mail on the 6th of January. There was a full moon between the 5th of January and the 5th of February, possibly 2. And I'm fairly confident that my pledges have turned out to be a lot more reliable than Rishi Sunak's. But what was his stupidest and what was his most important? Luke's in Chingford. Luke, what have you got? I've bored him to death by playing my own clips of myself. Is Luke there or not? Can we talk to Luke?
Hello.
Who's that?
It's Luke in Chingford.
Well, where were you?
I had you on mute.
You pardon?
I had myself on mute, sorry.
You had yourself on mute?
Yes.
Okay, well, welcome. What have you got for me?
I think the stupidest would be the halving inflation.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Tell me why. What are your reasons?
Well, what frustrates me is how it's covered in the news, I guess, both by the Conservative Party, but to a lesser extent also by journalists, which is that halving inflation, I would say, is a good thing. I'm not convinced how much the government's directly had to do with that, but once you're lapping high inflation in a year-on-year perspective, it probably has a good chance it's going to come down anyway.
Yep.
And for me, it doesn't address the fundamental issue that affects me and my family in the cost of living crisis, which is that for the period when inflation was in kind of high double digits and you had a lot of additional costs feeding into energy, rents, mortgage and food, that gap that has opened up between my salary and the monthly costs coming into my family, that gap does not get closed as long as inflation is still above zero.
No, that's a very good point. Of course it doesn't, unless your pay packet goes up by the same factor.
Yeah, and my pay rise, I think from memory was under 5%. So I'm paying, I think, about £300 a month extra in energy and mortgage costs compared to where I was 12, 18 months ago. So on the one hand, I'm grateful that the situation's not going to get any worse. Yeah. But from my perspective, my mortgage, I'm on a higher mortgage rate now, I think, for 5 years. And I don't really know when the energy prices are going to come down. And it just makes every month difficult in terms of making ends meet at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, crikey, that's actually a very grown-up analysis of what was essentially a fairly silly question, because that was the stupidest one. What's the most important one?
Well, probably NHS waiting lists would be the most important one for me. My recent kind of, when I've had to use the health service recently, I've not been blown away by the service that I've been receiving, and having people wait an inordinate length of time for. I mean, my dad, for example, had needed his hip replaced, and he was fortunate enough to have private health insurance, which I don't have private. Well, I don't have cover like my dad has.
Sure.
I just pity anyone that's waiting for an important operation like that on a very long waiting list.
And the government only really acknowledge their existence when the junior doctors are on strike or when the nurses are on strike. The rest of the time, it's out of sight and out of mind. Excellent votes from Luke, and I like Luke. Treating this with the seriousness that it deserves. What is Rishi Sunak's stupidest pledge? And what is his most important? As we come to the end of the year in which he promised that they would all be delivered in order to build a better future for the next generation, having worked night and day, these are all quotes, to fulfil the promises, he said back in January the 5th, 2023. Simon's in Huddersfield. Simon, take it away.
James.
Hello, mate.
Good morning. Happy Christmas.
Same to you.
Long time listening, and usually I listen to people saying, "Oh, they're not nervous," or "They are nervous," and I'm ordinarily not nervous, but I'm absolutely bricking it this morning. So
what? Just for this?
Yeah, just for this.
Oh,
I've tried it loads of times, but you keep giving it another go, don't you?
Thank you. Carry on.
Do you know what? I think his stupidest claim or his stupidest pledge was the one he made when he first got into power about accountability, honesty and integrity.
You can't. It's a sixth pledge. You can't. I mean, you're right, actually. God, all right. We're going to have to put on a little side order, aren't we, of the accountability, professionalism and Are you suggesting that he hasn't delivered accountability, professionalism and integrity, Simon?
Yeah, I kind of feel he hasn't. You know, he kind of smashed that one. Yeah, he's awful, isn't he? But I actually think, I think the smartest pledge he put, and I'm going to kind of go against you on this one, is the halving inflation one.
Right.
And the reason for that is that...
Is that a dog? Is that a dog in the background?
It's one of the dogs. The blooming doorbell went.
Oh, no, crikey.
I'm in a different room, so
that's
apologies.
All right. No, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't a fault on the line. Doorbell sends them potty. Go on. So I know what you're going to say next. If you're going against me, you're going to say that the inflation halving was the most important.
Yeah, and this is because we are in a country that still thinks that Boris, or a lot of people still think Boris got the big calls right, and get Brexit done, and we are a politically illiterate country, and a lot of people will see and hear halving inflation, and they will think actually takes responsibility for it.
Well done, Rishi Sunak. So the same people who think that Keir Starmer has a case to answer for having been a barrister and doing some barristering when he was a barrister are the same people who might think that Rishi Sunak bears some responsibility for halving inflation,
take all the credit.
Despite the fact that I'm pretty sure he's on the record when it was very high for saying that had nothing to do with the government.
Yeah, but up is down and left is right with these set of spiffs. So what do you expect? Nicely
put, Simon. I bet your nerves have gone now, have they? Relaxed into it?
No, I'm still shaking like a.
Well, there you go. You never know, do you? You never know how it's going to affect you. Thank you. 12:30 is the time. Couple of phone lines free. You can grab Simon's as he vacates it. So we got inflation halving is currently 2-2, both the stupidest and the most important. So are the waiting lists. Hang on, what was his stupidest? What was Simon's stupidest, Keith? Were you paying attention? Is anyone else paying attention here? Is he still there? He's gone. What? They must have stopped the... Oh, I knew this wouldn't work. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:33. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we are trying to work out what was the stupidest and what was the most important, or perhaps importantest, of Rishi Sunak's pledges. Thankfully, Derek is paying attention. I'm not sure anybody else is, but the last caller's suggestion for the stupidest was a new pledge. It wasn't actually one of the 5 pledges. It was the first pledge that preceded the 5 pledges, and the 5 pledges, of course, preceded the 7 bins. So it goes from the first pledge, accountability, professionalism, and integrity. Actually, do you know the way to remember the order in which he said that? I can't remember who pointed this out to me. I forgot to read out the text at the time. The order he did it in was actually integrity, professionalism, accountability. And if you are, like me, quite fond of a pint of IPA, that becomes the easiest way to remember the order in which he said the 3 things that he would bring back to government: integrity, professionalism, and accountability. So I don't know if we can add that. Do we add that to the list, or do we... Ian's been in touch. Ian is a regular supplier of ice cream to the capital, who I sometimes bump into around the Covent Garden area in the mornings. He says, "You always mess these poll things up. Please can I keep the scores next time you do one? Happy Christmas, mate." Well, happy Christmas to you as well. And happy Christmas to Derek, who remembered that, I think it was Simon, was it, the last caller? His accountability and integrity, professionalism and accountability has got 1 vote now. 2 each for inflation halving and waiting lists, and 1 on the stupid column for stop the boats. Steve's in Grimsby. Steve, what have you got?
Good afternoon, James.
Hello,
I've been wanting to speak for a long time.
Finally tempted you in.
Yeah, you are. Well, James, I've got so much admiration for you. I think the only error that you make is the same as mine. Is actually, if it is an error, is that you care. You're such a caring person, and the stuff that you talk about and the way that you analyse it is just truly amazing. Right. So the most stupidest thing was to say about inflation, because you're so right when I heard what you said maybe 5-10 minutes ago, that they'll take credit for the things when they've halved it, but they don't take credit, or they sweep under the carpet the things that pushed it there. Like, you remember Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng?
Yes.
And his wonderful attempts at trying to boost the economy, and he managed to put interest rates up by 5 or 6% in 2 months.
Yeah.
Genius.
Yeah, absolute genius. And then in he comes. So, yeah, well, I think there's no doubt about that. But it's weird because the people who think it's the most important are the ones who think that either it's really important that it happens, or it's important because people will fall for it. I'm not so sure they will. I think if they were going to fall for it, they would have done by now.
I don't know, James.
No,
I think people do fall for it. I mean, how did somebody IPA, which I thought was a fantastic analogy.
You'll never forget that now, will you? You'll never forget that.
It. No. How did somebody like that, his predecessor bar 2 with Liz Truss? How did Johnson ever get into power?
Well, I've written a book about that, Steve, which you've given me a wonderful
I'll have to
opportunity
get it and
to
read
mention.
it then,
There you
James.
go. That's available in
Yeah.
all good bookshops at the moment.
Yeah.
In fact, particularly.
Well, I'll put it on my Christmas
You should
list.
do. Yeah, it'll be coming down your chimney on Christmas Eve. And the most
Fantastic.
important one?
Personal to me, James.
Yeah.
Is waiting list. My wife went through cancer during lockdown.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But no, James, the service that she got and the compassion and care of the NHS were just amazing. And she's made a full recovery.
Oh, good.
What I worry about is what's going to happen for the people who are coming in, and for then to say that the waiting lists are longer because of the actions of the doctors and the specialists is just so disingenuous.
It's horrible, isn't it? It's really horrible.
I cannot believe how foul that is. And, they ought to come round and see these people.
Yeah, I think you're right.
At work, and the compassion and care they've got.
That's brilliantly put, beautifully put. Merry Christmas to you and your wife, Steve.
Thank you, James, and to you and all your family. And keep up the good work.
I have to. Our kids need shoes. Thank you, Steve. That's 4 now. Waiting lists. I told you they'd be runaway leaders on this, but the other it's going to be quite close for stupidest. Inflation, halving. Waiting lists have got 2 stupids as well, and only 1 Stop the Boats. I thought Stop the Boats might be a contender for the stupidest, actually, but what do I know? Mark's in Mill Hill. Mark, what do you reckon?
Well, I'm going to vote against everybody else.
Good.
Basically, the stupidest, most asinine, most ill-founded one was cutting public debt, cutting the debt. And the reason for that is you can't cut... If you've got... A lot of our public debt is down to public interest payments. So the interest payments on the debt are geared to the interest rate.
Yes.
So if you're going to put up interest rates in order to solve inflation...
Well, they're not in charge of that, though, are they?
Well, yeah, but that's going to if you're going to say that your policy of cutting inflation by using interest rates as the key weapon is successful, then you're kind of taking...
There's a sort of you're describing a form of economic illiteracy, I think, aren't you? Really?
Yes.
Which you wouldn't expect from a former Goldman Sachs man.
Maybe. So that's kind of... And then obviously making that pledge on growing the economy was not going to be possible if you're having to put up interest rates. So I think cutting the debt was, that was also economically illiterate, or selling an economically illiterate thing, because people confuse the debt, which is £2.5 trillion or whatever it is,
give or take,
with the deficit, which is the annual deficit.
Yes,
and even the annual deficit for this year is, I think, higher than it was last year. I think.
We'd have to check. So that's for what's most important?
I think growing the economy.
Yeah. Well, he's not done that, has he?
And he hasn't done that either. No. So it's
an extraordinary year. I wonder whether anybody thought at the time it would actually go as badly as it's gone. You probably would have given him 2 out of 3. I remember all the newspapers did roundups of likelihood, almost doing odds checkers on what was likely to happen and what wasn't likely to happen. He's completely, if we were football commentators, Mark, I'd turn to you now and go, he's completely carked it, Mark.
Yeah, and as you and I have discussed before, a couple of weeks ago, there's no guarantee that inflation is going to stay down, by the way. So I would be very, very careful of any promises made by
Rishi Sunak. I'd say, crikey, I'm glad I'm not on his Christmas present list, because whatever he said he was going to get you, you'd probably find yourself unwrapping an empty box come Christmas morning. Thank you, Mark. 12:41 is the time. Andrew in Edinburgh says, I bet you're the type who forgets the score during games of five-a-side. You may have a point there, Andrew. He goes, stupidest inflation, most important waiting lists. I'll put that down, actually. I'll take votes from text as well, and I think that the growing the economy is actually correct. You grow the economy and everything else follows. The problem is this lot that don't quite understand the relationship, as Mark has just pointed out, between all the other factors as well. Let's go to Liverpool next. Maria is there. Maria, stupidest and most important, please.
Hi, James.
Hello.
Okay, the stupidest is the inflation.
Yeah.
And not stupid from him, stupid that he thinks we are stupid.
Yeah.
We've had two things this year. We've had greedflation and we've had shrinkflation. So when he called all the manufacturers in the summer and said, get the prices down, what they did was reduce the volume of their products. And that's when, if you go to the shop, none of these people ever go to a supermarket and shop.
They must do. I know what you mean. They must. They must. Well, I mean,
they can't do. A loaf of bread, right, was £1 last year. Well, now £1.45, but about a month ago, it went down by about a third. So not only has it gone up 45% since last year, it's gone down by a third. And that's happened to so many groceries in the shops. So you've got greedflation and shrinkflation. So all this inflation has gone down. It's just a load of absolute nonsense. The value you get for the money that you had last year is half of what you get this year, basically.
Yes, that makes sense.
Okay. So that's the stupidest. The most important is the NHS, and that's a double whammy. Not only have you got the people who want to work, who could help the economy by working, but can't work because they're waiting for treatment, you've got their carers as well.
This is true.
So you've got all the
It's mad,
people.
isn't it? It would fix up so much, so many other problems. It's all the long-term stuff that would fix. He wants all his hits in the short term, but in fact, improving the country involves focusing on the long term. So pledges, even in and of themselves, are a daft idea, aren't they?
Oh, they're absolutely. Excuse me, but
That's
no.
all right. Steady on.
I've got nervous now.
Well, was
James.
that a cough?
nervous.
Was that a cough or a sneeze? Was that a cough?
That was a cough.
It was a cough. Well, it sounded like a sneeze. Well, we've done that.
that
We've
was
done
a
the
cough.
waiting lists. I hope it's nothing serious, because it'll be 3 years before they can see you.
James, it's talking to you. My Christmas wish has come true. You have a wonderful Christmas.
You too, Maria. Thank you so much. Ho, ho, ho. David, thank you. Well, lovely. David's in Birmingham. David, what's it going to be?
Hi, James.
Hello,
first off, I saw you last week at the Oh God What Now Christmas shindig,
yes.
so I'm one of those weirdos that ring into radio shows.
Don't blow my cover like that. Jeez. Holy moly. That was a good night, wasn't it? That was a great
brilliant.
night.
Absolutely superb, and it was great to meet a few of the regulars afterwards as well, which was great.
Excellent.
Absolute pleasure. For me, the worst of his pledges is the one around inflation, and it's actually a little bit different to what other people have been saying.
Go on.
What's the lever that is used to bring inflation down?
Go on.
Interest rates.
Yes, of course, which is set by the Bank of England.
Which is set by the Bank of England, which is independent, theoretically.
Yeah.
So it's
really bad, that, isn't it? It's really disingenuous.
Really bad. Yeah, totally. I mean, yes, disingenuous is a polite way of putting what I'd put. I just think he's a liar, but there we go.
Fair enough.
So that.
And then the most important.
For me, it's the NHS.
Yeah.
I'm on waiting list, so I've got plenty of things wrong with me. That's close. No, it's fine. I mean, it's nothing serious. So,
okay.
But it's one of those things where it is frustrating, and it doesn't stop me. But it leads to so much others, as other people have said previously very eloquently. If they want people to work, you've got to make sure they're fit enough to work.
And of course, by not negotiating in good faith with the BMA, they've made it worse. And although the nurses are only on a kind of wait and see pie, they're not. I don't think they've ruled out any future actions yet. So, and of course, again, we need to remind ourselves this is England and Wales. The Scottish government has somehow managed to perform better on some of these measures, but they've made it worse, not better. That was the maddest thing about the waiting list pledges. They must have known that the workforce was not only fleeing in numbers, but buckling under the strains that were already in place.
Absolutely, but they do it across the piece. Think about people are using the railway less, and why is that? It's because you can't guarantee that there's going to be a service. And why is that?
Because you're absolutely. Did you come up to Euston then?
Yeah, I came through Euston,
Well,
but I
you
got
were
back. I got back on the Sunday, and it was fine. The only delay was actually caused by trespassers on the line near Rugby.
We
So
can't blame Rishi Sunak for that,
Not even I can blame Sunak for that. But it's interesting what you just said there about bad faith actors,
Yes.
and I think this all goes back really to. I mean, you could take it back to Johnson and the negotiations with the EU and bad faith acting within that, and everything they've done since. And
has been set.
arguably
The
before,
tone has been
the
set.
tone has been set. There has been no change. I think the thing with Sunak is just because he wears a nice suit and speaks quietly and has that public school debate.
I don't agree with you. His suits aren't very nice.
But they're bespoke.
Probably.
They're real fitting. They're real fitting.
They are real fitting. They're halfway down his calves.
Well, they are, but that's to try and make him look taller, isn't it?
I don't think
because
that works. Is that a thing? Is that a thing? If you wear your trousers at half-mast, you look taller.
That's the only thing I can think of, because he's,
the producer agrees with you, and she's very short. It's 12:47.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10-1. I don't know if you were listening on Wednesday. Something quite special happened when we were talking about the relationship between environment and aspiration as a sort of form of you can't be what you can't see, and talking about overcoming adversity. And Fatima Whitbread rang in, the legendary athlete, and I thought I knew some elements of her life story, but even the brief snapshot that she gave us during the course of that call about her early years in care were absolutely breathtaking. And amazingly, that very night, because she rang us from the car on her way to the BBC Sports Personality of the Year Awards, but she knew, but we didn't, that she was due to pick up the Helen Rollason Award for a triumph in the face of adversity. And it was an incredibly moving scene, and it just, I don't know why, I bet you felt the same. I felt a bit proprietary. I thought, she was just on the show today, and now she's picking up that wonderful award. That was on Tuesday. Yesterday, we both found time. Well, it makes it sound like I've got a packed schedule. Fatima very kindly found the time to come and talk to me for this week's Full Disclosure, which will be the final one of the year, and which I think, and when you've listened to it, you will probably agree, it's got to be a contender for the best of the year as well.
I'd been abandoned as a baby, and some would say left to die. I mean, a neighbour heard a baby crying in a flat, and she hadn't seen anybody coming or going for a couple of days, so she called the police, and they banged the door down, rescued the baby, which was myself, and then spent the next 6 months recovering from malnutrition and nappy rash. And during that period, Hackney Borough Council made me a ward of court, and then I spent the next 14 years of my life in children's homes.
When were you first told that story? When did you first hear that?
Well, like all care leavers, you have the opportunity to be able to pick up your papers, which is what I wanted to do from Somerset House, and find out more about what was my background, my history, and which often the case a lot of these young children like to know.
Yes, of course.
Some of it's good and some of it's not so good, and I'm also very keen to make sure that some of these children, when they go and get their papers, they've got somebody that can sit with them.
Yes.
Because there's a lot for them. Some of it's a shock,
yeah.
When they find out what's gone on in their lives and why they were sort of left to go in homes or being fostered, and that's hard to process. But for me, it wasn't that difficult. I kind of lived that life for 14 years, and I knew that there wasn't really anybody out there. The biological mum, and I call it the biological mum because for the first 5 years of my life, I lived in Hertfordshire, and I had no communication whatsoever, and nobody sat me down and said, look, this is the reason why you're in care. And I think that's the most difficult thing for a young child, to process that, and their minds start thinking, they get trapped in their head like a prison. And yes, they arrive in care with a particular set of issues, emotional trauma, abandonment, neglect, and trust issues as well. And and that's, as I said, there's no fault of their own. And then, of course, back in the 60s, there's always a stigmatisation with children that lived in the care system. They must be the naughty kids, that's why they're in the homes. Well, in actual fact, no, it's not. And for me, it was no different. And so it was a tough old period of time whilst in the children's home. There were 25 other kids there, James. And I can remember always playing in the front room, and anybody that faced the car park. Yeah. And anybody that came in, I would always say, is that my mummy coming to get me? Which is, quite...
So you're conscious of what you haven't got, but you don't know why.
Absolutely.
Incredible stuff. And Fatima, as she explained on Tuesday, now pretty much dedicating her life to helping children who are in care. When she gets on to talking about that, this happens sometimes in long interviews. I'm sure you've noticed it in the past. There's a different mood in the room. And when a guest gets onto a subject about which they are passionate, it's almost like someone's turned the light up in the studio. Not the volume necessarily, but the light. There's a level of animation. And when Fatima gets onto the subject of working tirelessly now to help children still in care, because there's more children in care today than there was when she was in the 70s, the 60s, She just illuminated the entire studio. You can watch it as well, of course, on YouTube, or you can listen to the podcast wherever you get your podcast at Global Player. But I do want to direct you also to the campaign that she is now running, which is called Fatima's Campaign. The website is fatimascampaign.com. So obviously no apostrophes or anything like that. So Fatima's Campaign, as you'd expect it to be spelt, .com. And you can go there, you can make donations to help support the work that she's doing. You can find out a lot more about it. Find out even, and I think you might want to do this after listening to the interview, if you don't already, how you might be able to help in some way, shape or form. Because I'll tell you now, that woman is on a mission. And she was 14 years old when she embarked upon a mission to become the best javelin thrower in the world. She achieved that mission. I would not bet against her achieving this mission as well. But find out more about it there at fatimascampaign.com. Couple of minutes left, couple more calls. Philip's in Hartlepool. Stupidest pledge and most important pledge, please, Philip.
I'll go most important first.
Yep.
The NHS, for all the obvious reasons.
It's romped home, the NHS.
Yeah.
There's no competition.
Yeah, and stupidest one, the boats, because nobody's mentioned Brexit so far.
That's true.
We're out of the European Union. It's only an issue that's going to be resolved with other countries.
Proper cooperation.
Proper cooperation and stuff. And
it's a stupid one as well. Well, the thing I find stupidest about that one is that it hasn't even appeased the idiots that it was designed to appease.
Yeah. Other than the lucrative trade in second-hand outboard motors, that must be going on in Dover and places. The other thing is, Sunak was in the select committee the other day.
Yeah, that's right.
With all the chairs of all the select committees.
Yes.
And he was asked by all of them, had he met these pledges? And the arrogance of the man was to answer, well, the year's not over yet.
Cheeky beggar.
So are you jumping the gun? Because there's another 9 days and Christmas miracles could happen.
It could all come good in the next night. We should have got that clip ready. Well, you should be on the team. This takes us back to Jason's suggestion that we start having regular meetings in the Red Lion. It's quite far for you to come from Hartlepool. Put together some sort of plan for the new year. In fact, I forgot to do all of the other suggestions for New Year's resolutions. Let me see if I can find a couple of them. Ian says you should try to sound less sarcastic when reciting the LBC official texts. I don't know what he's talking about, Sheila.
I live for that.
I know. I couldn't imbue them with any more energy.
I live for it.
I could even if I tried.
I read it like the speaking clock.
That's a good way. I might try that as well. No more quotes from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Less verbosity and more plain English, and no book plugging. Well, Jonathan, I'm afraid 3 out of 3. I'm not going to be doing any of them in the new year. Quite the opposite. And finally, have a manifesto. Pick a subject, then take calls, get an informed answer and put it in your manifesto. I quite like that from Roy. We can assemble a show manifesto. Last word on this. Roundup of Rishi's pledges goes to Toby in Chiswick. Toby, what's it going to be?
Merry Christmas, James. Merry Christmas.
Same to you.
And I actually disagreeing with you. I think the daftest pledge he made was to grow the economy.
Yeah.
Because I don't actually think he hasn't managed to do it, and it's probably the one thing that he's had
most easily measurable, the most visible failure, probably.
Yeah,
will
and
be that.
It's the last working day before Christmas, and there's gloomy, news about recession.
Every report is about the economy shrinking. I'm only hurrying you because I've only just glanced at the clock. What is the most important?
I think it has to be the waiting list, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Not for me personally, but for
it's way ahead of the field. I think that's got 10 votes. Inflation coming in far ahead. I thought it would be stop the boats. I hope I didn't skew it by picking inflation first and then setting the tone for the conversation. But that is it from me for another day and indeed for another year. I listen, I tell you all the time how much I love you, but at this time of year, I think it's important to, not you, Keith, I'm talking to the people listening to the programme.